Hello and welcome to the DTC Podcast. I'm Eric Dyck. Today we are privileged to have a chat with an e-commerce legend, Drew Sanocki. Introduced me at first by Ezra Firestone as one of his main e-commerce mentors, Drew has forged his path in the early days of e-commerce as something of a turnaround specialist sent into legacy brands to help them transition into e-com with a special focus on catalog or direct mail marketing. Fast forward to today, where Drew leads PostPilot during the renaissance of physical mail as a strong middle-of-funnel option for D2C brands. On this podcast, you'll hear Drew's top turnaround toolkit, which focuses mainly on the concepts of profitability over growth, tracking marginal CaC, not just CAC, as well as a trend back towards both physical storefronts as well as physical mail marketing. If you've ever thought of dropping your audience a postcard, don't miss this one. On with the show.
Don't go all in on one channel. I learned that lesson with long tail SEO. I learned it again on AdWords, and I learned it again on Facebook most recently, where you go all in on one channel and then iOS happens and that channel goes away. Or a couple of weeks ago, Facebook ad costs went through the roof for one weekend. An underpriced ad channel made everybody a lazy marketer, where for years there, 2015 to 2020, everybody was a Facebook god. We're just looking at the results of an underpriced ad channel. Like anybody who throws money in there is winning. Now, costs have returned back to reality. You've got to be a good marketer again. You know, yes, I want direct mail going, and I want organic going, and I want email going. Like it's just another arrow in your quiver.
Are you a Shopify brand owner looking to win, keep, and grow your customers? Everyone knows apps are fast becoming the best way to increase retention and boost sales. A sleek and engaging app normally means two things, time and money. But AppTile have changed the game. Their seamless no-code editor enables beautiful, personalized journeys for every customer. And with their free plan, nothing is stopping you from getting started. You'll pay as you grow, not as you go. So whether you're just starting out or a Shopify superstar, head over to apptile.com today and start designing your dream app. Drew, welcome to the D2C Podcast. This is a long time coming. I was just saying in the preamble, I think it was probably 2018 when I met Ezra Firestone, and one of the first people he mentioned, he's like, you got to meet Drew. And I think we've been kind of going back and forth since then. And I know you're now with PostPilot, but I know you've just had such a long, interesting career, I feel like, in this space. So I'm finally glad to have you on the podcast.
I'm excited to be here. I would say it's a long career. I don't know if it's an interesting one.
Well, let's start me at the beginning, because I like the way Ezra prefaced you was just that you'd had a number of early e-commerce experiences with some of the world's biggest brands and really kind of cut your teeth with some big players.
I think it's just by, I've been under the hoop for so long, eventually you're going to get a couple of baskets, right? So I started my e-commerce career in 2000. I started a brand, retail brand. This was before Shopify, before Magento, I guess we were doing drop shipping, which was like what everybody did back then, selling furniture, sold that. And then I sort of backed into this role of like a D2C turnaround artist, where I would buy companies, get them profitable, and sell them. And I probably did that for another 10 years.
Very interesting. Back then, what were the key things? Because I think now, partnered with this agency, everything, we're a hammer, so everything looks like a nail. We think right away, okay, we're going to improve their marketing. But I'm curious, from a D2C fixer or e-commerce fixer back then, what were the main things you were fixing?
The marketing.
Yeah.
It was, when I started my brand in 2000, there was no D2C podcast. There was no Ezra Firestone to go learn from. So I went to the library and got books out on catalog marketing and direct mail, because that industry is probably 100 years old. And they laid out a framework, which I guess it's not sexy to call it catalog marketing. It's more sexy to call it database marketing. But they laid out a framework on how to segment your customers and treat different customers differently. And that's really the framework that brought me through my career. And now when I buy a company, it's like, okay, go right to the marketing. Are they doing their segmentation right? Are they marketing properly? In line with that? Are they treating different customers differently? And that's sort of where we start.
When you say treating different customers differently, give me some. Obviously, there's a lot of examples on what that exactly means. But what are the most critical ones that you look for? The most critical segmentations.
Yeah, this was. I learned this lesson at Design Public, my first brand, but then at Karmaloop, which was a big streetwear brand, we acquired that out of bankruptcy. And it was sort of that exercise on the first day you walk in and you look at their customer data, you lay it out on a table and you realize that you've got 20% of the customers are driving 80% of the revenue. That, most kids come in and buy from Karmaloop, they buy like a $20 t-shirt and they leave, they never come back again. So it's a one-time buyer. And then you've got on the other end of the spectrum, these kids who would come in and spend, thousands of dollars on their first purchase and then buy again and buy again. And so it's a little bit nuanced, but you're like, okay, who are those 20%? What do they have in common? Are we all acquiring them from the same place? Are they all buying the same thing? And you just start to begin to realize you've got very different kinds of customers. And if we treat them differently, it becomes a lot easier to grow the business.
Yeah, a lot more. Yeah, we're finding this right now with our content and our advertisers, and the more niche down and dynamic you are with all of this stuff, it's pretty age old marketing know-how, and we finally have the technology to do all the segmentation. I feel like there's a lot of marketers out there who don't always eat their own dog food when it comes to actually marketing to their own list the way they might to consumers. Yeah,
because I think customer behavior and really human behavior in general follows that like Pareto distribution, where you see that sort of 80-20 rule everywhere. 20% of the people drive 80% of the results. And it could be a content business, and you realize the same thing, that 20% of your readers are reading 80%, or consuming or clicking the most. So that's the first eye-opening thing, is like not all customers are created equally. And then the second eye-opening thing is if you dig a little bit, often, more times than not, the cost of acquisition of one of your better customers is the same as one of your worst customers. I call them whales and minnows. So it's like, hey, if it costs as much to acquire that kid who's spending $5,000 on streetwear as it does to acquire the kid who's spending $20 on streetwear, if I just reorient my marketing spend to acquiring more whales, like I'm going to grow the company that much faster without deploying more capital.
So marketing turnarounds, like fundamental marketing segmentation, you would look at. What else, when it comes to turning a company around, are things that you zero in on?
Yeah, I think of Auto Anything is another one. We bought out of AutoZone. So all these brands they're big and they're busted. They're like doing 100 million, losing 10, if I had to sum them all up. And they all, for a number of different reasons, have like lost their secret sauce. And so you get in there and you've got often way too many people running the company. And when you look at who's running, when you look at the team, they've often starved the groups that were actually growing the company. In Auto Anything's case, maybe the marketing and SEO teams that were originally growing that company, like they're gone. And then you've got staff functions that are just have blown up. And so it's really a matter of like changing the culture and trying to rebuild that, that secret sauce and identify the people who can rise up in the organization, and then probably outsource or get rid of the other teams that really don't make a lot of sense given the mission of the company. This
sounds like a like a positive version of what Tai Lopez was trying to do with some of his acquisitions. But I feel like he hasn't, from what I've heard, he hasn't been able to turn around in the same way that these ones have.
I bid against him on a number of them, but in each case lost. So it's easier said than done. It's easy to come on a podcast and say this is how you turn around $100 million company, but it's like not until you get in there and look at all the data and meet the team that you sort of really can size up how hard this is going to be. I thought Auto Anything would be a 1-year turnaround, and it was 3+, right? So
yeah,
it really depends.
We just ran this mastermind in Las Vegas, and a friend of mine who was doing affiliate stuff previously jumped into e-commerce, and then he built his own store, but now he just buys them. And he was just saying, he's like, mate, he's like, this is a pretty good business. This idea of like not doing the 0 to 1 component, like really coming in there and buying an established business. It seems like a huge trend, not just for e-commerce businesses, but like across all the boomers who are retiring in a lot of ways, right? This opportunity to buy businesses and turn them around.
Yeah, Cody Sanchez is really like pounds the table on that. But I think that's one of my big learnings if I look back on 20 years in D2C, buy versus build. And for me, the bootstrapping, the learning, like that took years at my first business to figure it out. And then when I sold that one, it was around when I got married and had kids. So it just kind of all like I couldn't do it again. I couldn't work 7 days a week and 20 hours a day to bootstrap. And so I was just like dragged kicking and screaming into buying businesses. But it turned out to be like I called it entrepreneurship in my 40s, because it was like you could buy a business, they've got customers coming in, you got revenue, you could pay yourself. It's just a matter of fixing it, right? But you don't have to fix it when you're not making any money, which is huge, right? As an entrepreneur.
And in this era of like lower multiples and rising headwinds, maybe for D2C brands, there's probably an increased opportunity out there to grab distressed operations potentially.
Yeah, and I think it's a better investment financially, right? Like if you're an investment geek like I am, think of like growth funds versus value funds. Have you heard of this breakdown?
No.
Different parts of just public investing, right? Different parts of the stock market. There are growth stocks, which are, you want to buy the rocket ship on the way up, like Amazon. And then there are value stocks, which Warren Buffett kind of made famous, and guys like Ben Graham, which is, you want to buy this cigarette, like the stories, you buy the cigarette butt off the ground and you get a couple more puffs out of it, and it's not attractive at all. And it's not sexy. But, the value investors are trying to buy often businesses where you look at the financials, the public financials, and you see like they have more cash on the balance sheet than the company's trading at, right? So they're often like just crappy businesses or airlines, are always bought and sold by value investors. It's not Tesla, it's not Amazon. And I feel like in the world of D2C, we still got that value versus growth thing going on where everybody wants to be native deodorant, and like Moise, everybody wants to have the $100 million outcome or whatever he had. But I think the reality is we all should be running our businesses for profitability and just thinking about them a little bit more like a value investor would, right? Because the odds of becoming Moise are really low.
Yeah. And you spent a lot of your career, I think you've probably been on all sides of the coin for a long time, but you're on product side. You've now moved to build a SaaS company. And I actually didn't realize that PostPilot like had such a through line to the very beginnings of your career with your furniture business as well. Let's dive in on that a little bit more. Like, first of all,
that's the origin story, man.
Yeah. Like what brought you to PostPilot? Yeah.
I mean, it was really like, that's how I learned how to market. Was going to the library, getting books out on catalog marketing. And they popularized this idea of RFM, recency, frequency, monetary value. It's how they segment their customers. Fast forward a couple of years, and I'm like, this is, any marketer will tell you, like your best target is always previous buyers. And I'd buy these brands and I'd look at their email lists and I'd say, only 10%, like Karmaloop, I don't know how many, 5 million names on their list, like only 10% are 10% of their previous buyers are actively opening their emails. So you're just like, well, how am I going to get the other 90%? And of course you lean into SMS and Facebook and everything else, but like direct mail was a great way to take whatever's working on email, like a Black Friday offer or a win back, and just flip it to a bigger audience. Right. So that was the use case that I did again and again. I did a Karmaloop, I did an Auto Anything. And there was no simple tool to do that. It was like Sanocki's got to download a list from Shopify and find a printer and send the postcards and then like try to back into Attribution. I was like, no, it's got to be Klaviyo for postcards. So in 2018, I bought what is now PostPilot, another acquisition, bought it off the developer. I was like, that kind of gets us there, but it needs to be Klaviyo for postcards. He said, what are you talking about? And I spent a year or two on the product with him. And that was the genesis of it. I wanted to plug into my stack and be able to extend my marketing on the retention side, extend my marketing to a bigger audience, right? And since then it's gone on, and now it does full funnel, it does acquisition. But at the beginning, that was like the genesis of it.
And direct mail is it's funny. I was asking your opinion on ChatGPT for this piece we're putting out. You're like, I'm going the other way, man. I'm going physical. And so I have not been in this physical marketing world. I don't understand. I've heard that you can just buy addresses. It's not the same in terms of like can spam and owning email. You can direct mail cold. You can direct mail warm. I guess you're talking about taking email addresses where you may not have addresses and trying to back calculate into addresses, or in your case, do you also have addresses?
Well, obviously, I mean, if you run a Shopify brand, you've got the addresses of all your customers, right? Because they're in your store.
Yeah.
So there, you use direct mail just to extend, just to make sure you could drop a mailing to them, whether they've opted in or not.
Yeah.
Right. So the law says you have to honor the request to unsubscribe, but you do not need the opt-in. So it's like you could hit all your previous buyers. Right? No other channel can do that. On the acquisition side, where you don't have the address, there are a couple things you could do. We've got some matching technology where, site traffic, we can correlate that to a physical address and you could drop a card. Think of that as like postcard retargeting. You could give us a list of email addresses that have never purchased, and we could correlate that to a physical address and drop a card. And in both cases, you're using third-party data sources that are essentially publicly available to get that info. And then on the pure acquisition side, again, there's more, you would up until now go to a direct mail agency and buy lists, which you could do in email too. I think I've never really gotten it to work in email, to be honest, like cold list buying or cold emails to lists. But on direct mail, you can target it by these people bought skincare online in the last 6 months. You could do a lookalike off your best buyers. You can layer on a lot of demographic and geographic attributes, and then drop drop postcard campaigns or catalog campaigns to them. And it works. You're not going to get like a 10x ROI on an acquisition campaign, or you're lucky if you do. But a lot of brands now are happy with 1.5 to 3. ROAS on an acquisition campaign. So it's been good.
Over the course of what time, like what are the time windows like with direct mail? Is it, because I remember I was talking with some other offline things like billboards, podcasts, having a much more stronger like latent effect over time, or is this more of a direct response method just because it's in their mail, they're getting it the next day?
Yeah, certainly direct mail started with that direct response, like old sales letters by guys like Gary Halper, and you read them and it's like, buy now, or mail this in and get a 20 CD info package on something. But we see, if you were to push a campaign out today, it probably hits someone's mailbox in 3 days to a week. I think the attribution windows are just longer than what we're used to online. So we like to say 60 days because people get a piece of print collateral and they throw it down on the coffee table, or like they tack it to the fridge. And so what we see is just like, hey, it's a very long curve that extends out over a couple months when people are redeeming the offers, right?
Yeah. Want to delight your customers so they keep coming back for more? Tidio, the highest rated customer experience software on Shopify, helps online businesses gain and retain customers with personalized shopping experiences. With Tidio, you can recommend products and offer discounts based on user behavior and order history without leaving the chat widget. Tidio also takes the pressure off your support team. The app enables you to manage all your communication channels in one dashboard and automate up to 47% of recurring questions using AI. Increase customer satisfaction and sales with personalized shopping experiences. Visit tidio.com/DTC and get an exclusive 20% discount for DTC Podcast listeners. That's TIDIO.com/DTC. Okay, walk me through a campaign then. Like, what are the most successful? Obviously extending, offers to your existing your existing audience, your existing customer base. Mother's Day is coming up. What are the most successful brands doing for Mother's Day with direct mail?
I think in that case, I would think about, you break it into retention and acquisition. On the retention side, you take whatever's working in email, whatever you're doing in email that's working, flip it into direct mail. It's kind of like a no-brainer. And that could be a one-off campaign like Black Friday or Mother's Day. Imagine how good those campaigns are. Well, you're just extending the audience to people who have never subscribed or are not opening your emails. Or it could be an automated campaign, like a win back, abandoned cart, second purchase. Like if that stuff's working in email, extend it into direct mail.
Yep.
Acquisition side, that's probably that's your catalog drops or your trifold drops, or where you're trying to get more customers. And we see a lot of apparel brands doing that's when they announce their new spring collection or something through that,
what percent, we like to talk like percentages of ad mix kind of thing on the podcast between TikTok and Google. Like, where does direct mail sit in terms of your ad mix for a brand that's really rocking it?
It's got to be 100%, man.
100% direct mail.
You heard it here first.
Yeah.
No, our goal is just to be a top 4. It's like I want every CMO to think in terms of organic, paid, email, and direct mail, and it's going to vary by the brand. I think it's just another channel. I think one of the things we've learned again, I've learned it several times, but I would say younger people have learned it the first time, is don't go all in on one channel. I learned that lesson with SEO, long tail SEO. I learned it again on AdWords and I learned it again on Facebook most recently, where you go all in on one channel, put all your chips on one, and then iOS happens and that channel goes away. Or I don't know, a couple of weeks ago, Facebook ad costs went through the roof for one weekend. Do you remember this?
Yeah.
It's I think an underpriced ad channel made everybody a lazy marketer, where for years there, really for 2015 to 2020, everybody was a Facebook god. It was just everybody and their brother was like a Facebook stud. And it's this is an ad god, a funnels god, a funnels bro.
Ninja. We're ninjas too.
Yeah, we're just looking at the results of an underpriced ad channel. Anybody who throws money in there is winning. And I think now that costs have returned back to reality, or maybe the arbitrage is gone, you've got to be a good marketer again. Yes, I want direct mail going, and I want organic going, and I want email going. It's just another arrow in your quiver.
Yeah, and I think one of the things I was listening to the ButcherBox CEO the other day, just talking about there's a fine line. We, as a pilot house agency that does every kind of traffic source under the sun, we love to talk omni-channel, but there's also, you have to balance that with attention creep, and making sure if you're doing 8 different things, that you make sure that you're actually measuring incrementality as well. But I think there's a happy medium that you're talking about with the four riders there we're talking about, with the socials, the Googles, the email, and the direct mail, obviously.
Yeah, there are obviously plenty of brands that don't do direct mail, and I know a handful that have grown to 20, 30 million in revenue only off direct mail, which is kind of weird. But I just think it's part of the mix. I realize it's a heavier lift than setting up a Facebook ad campaign, right? So I think you got to be at a certain scale with a certain AOV typically, where it works better. But at some point it does become a no-brainer, especially on the retention side.
What I think delight is something I always like to talk about in customer experiences, and getting something in the mail is just delightful. There's just an aspect to getting something in the mail that I still like, because it doesn't happen that much. Can you think of any examples of brands that have, what's the most delightful thing a brand has sent in the mail with PostPilot that you can talk about?
I think the coolest thing we've got going on now is is our trifold format called a cartalog. So there's a lot of like rules of thumb in direct mail that are all really boring. But one is, if you're going to acquire new customers, you want to show them a selection. Because in other words, as opposed to one product, you want to show them like 10. So the reasons, like just higher likely, you're going to a cold audience, it's a higher likelihood of conversion to justify the cost of the mailing. Catalogs are a pain, right? Catalogs you work on for 6 months with a creative agency. You've got to line up a printer. You got to line up paper. What if you change pricing? What if something goes out of stock? This is why nobody, it's a dying industry. So we said, well, like, how are we going to get extensive selection on a piece of print collateral that scales in a way that brands could test into it? And we've moved to this trifold format called a cartalog, which dynamically can pull products out of Shopify. You can change pricing on the fly. It goes out on a rolling basis. So I tried to think of it like a Facebook ad buyer. Like, give me my lookalike. Okay, here's the audience. And now I'm going to drop this product to them, a couple hundred a day or whatever the rate is. And I see the results in a week. So I think cartalogs are really interesting on the acquisition side. And it's probably like one of the cooler things we've got going on right now.
Cool. Innovation in direct mail. Love to hear it. I just love, too, you're just a story. I feel like you've had so many lives or careers within the D2C career. And to have, is this your biggest win? Is PostPilot so far, like, I guess you've probably had a lot of big wins, but is PostPilot trending like one of your biggest wins?
It TBD, but I would say yes. It's like I'm 51 years old. I feel like this is the culmination of 20 years of work. The turnarounds were great. You're rarely going to hit a home run on a turnaround. Like, the private equity community is very pleased with like a 3x return on their invested capital after a couple of years, so it's a little bit more like going for doubles, you're just kind of like, you buy these things for $1, you sell them for $3 in a couple of years, and everybody gets a piece. But PostPilot, I think it's tapping everything. It's like my knowledge of eCommerce, my knowledge of building a team, which I kind of learned in the Navy. It's how to build a brand. It's a lot of it's sort of coming together. And just in the nick of time, man, because I got to retire in a couple of years.
I just love stories because D2C is the most successful thing I've been a part of in my 43 years, and just to know, like, I could fuck this up and still have a big win in my when I'm 51. It's like, it's great.
He finally made it.
Sanocki did it.
Yeah. Everybody who's watching this podcast can point to me as an example of somebody who's not made it until 51 and then made it. But
you had a lot of making it, but I just love it for Gen X. Just love it for Gen X. It's fine. We're still ruling the roost here, right?
I'm just, what's the Gen after Gen X? Who are the young kids these days? Like,
oh yeah, how old are your kids? You've got a couple kids, right?
Yeah, 8 and 10.
8 and 10. I have a 9-year-old, and I just heard the term that scared the shit out of me the other day called screenager. That's the one term for
I saw that
screenager.
somewhere.
I'm like, ooh, I do not like that, but I feel it in my soul after the homeschooling effect of Corona and all that. It was. But
don't you feel like our like it's? I don't want to say it's easy to make a buck these days, but I think if you're on Twitter and you follow like the hype, it's like these people in their 20s and 30s are accomplishing what it took me 51 years or whatever to accomplish. And it's just like, I guess it's great. It's just like there's never been more opportunity than now, to do that.
And fewer excuses, probably too. Like, I think there was this e-commerce heyday that we've kind of been a little hungover from, and it's still trending up overall. And then everything else is you just tell GPT agent to do it or whatever. I just bought Chat DTC, by the way.
Nice.
So look out. What's you gave me your high level take on AI. Are you guys using it in your business, or like, I imagine there's ways to be more dynamic in the way you message campaigns using AI. Like, what are your overall thoughts on AI as a elder statesman of the biz?
Yeah. Thanks, man.
It's not a nice thing. I shouldn't have said that.
It's fine. It's fine. Say it. Okay. I think it's. I mean, everybody's played around with it. It scares me. I'm glad I run a business that has printers and, real world constraints on supply, and it's a little bit of a moat that I think keeps some kid in a basement from building PostPilot, and rolling. So we have our own printers. Did I tell you that? So we're vertical.
Okay.
Which at first I was like, this isn't cool. I want to be a software company. I don't want to be a printer, but it's a bit of a moat. And now more than ever, like, I think, man, in software in particular, more so than D2C, I'd be watching my back, 24/7. Like, how long until somebody comes up with a chat version of the intelligence that's in Klaviyo, or like these very big companies could be disrupted so quickly, right? Through AI. We're using it in our business, just like everybody else is. You're messing around with it. You're trying copywriting and landing pages. And I think there's an opportunity to do some AI in the onboarding on sort of like campaign development and audience development. We're certainly working there.
That's interesting.
But I don't think I would hope our business is not as vulnerable as like a pure software company to AI.
Yeah. I've had 3 companies reach out to us to be like, hey, you can just write a whole newsletter at the touch of a button, which is always interesting to me. And that's why I think the podcast, you were talking about starting your own podcast, restarting that. The podcast, like these human connections we make, until I can just program an avatar of myself to have these conversations for me, are still going to be really valuable and harder to replicate. I think I use them for summarizing them and making sure I'm hitting like SEO notes and other, there's other things that I use to make podcasting easier with it, but just still this, like the ability to be really, I was actually curious about, I saw your post and I didn't read the comments. What is it that ChatGPT can't replicate about a Gary Halbert sales letter? Because I've actually had ChatGPT write sales copy for me using specifically Gary Halbert and other people, and it's done a pretty good job. What's the thing that GPT will miss in a Gary Halbert sales letter?
I hesitate to say it because I feel like in 2 weeks it'll become irrelevant. But I mean, if you played around with it for copywriting, it's good. It's still, you can still tell it's written by AI, and I think the great copywriters can tell a story and they can connect with you on that human level that I'm not saying it could never be done, but it's just, that's the challenge. That's the hill they got to climb.
I'm just going to build into the intro of this and all content that we write that it now may self-destruct within, 20 days, because all of this stuff is changing so rapidly. So I won't let you die on that hill. But I find that all the time. Like every time that that sales copy works well for us, it has some weird thing that I threw in there about my this or that story, or just all these humanizing elements that you put into your copy that ChatGPT so far really only just skates along the surface of, and kind of pays lip service to, and doesn't really dig down to that like juicy, interesting level that I think so much sales copy has.
Right.
Any other high level trends that you see? Like any other high level trends you see in the e-commerce space that you'd want to call out for our listeners?
Trends, I think it's like we've just returned back to this baseline, right? Which we probably were at pre-COVID, 10% year-over-year growth. It's still a great place and a great time to start a business. I just think it's not a trend as much as like, I think the brands that are going to win, or for most of the people listening to the podcast, you should just focus on starting a profitable business or buying one. I think we just got so fixated on growth for a while, on rocket ships and on sort of exits and on venture funding, which I don't even know if it belongs in D2C, that we got away from like, hey, I need a business that cash flows and sort of all value comes from that. I think that's a much more reasonable target, certainly less risky for an entrepreneur to go after, and I think the brands that win are the one, like if you've got cash flow, you can weather almost any storm. So I think the brands that kind of, you run a profitable business, you focus on your best customers, you look at constantly finding new pools of inexpensive customers to acquire. And part of that's probably going beyond D2C to brick and mortar. Like those are all keys to success.
What's the difference? I'm just mining your tweets again from a while ago as well. You mentioned the difference, entrepreneurs needing to know the difference between CAC and marginal CAC. Can you explain that to me?
Yeah, I think everybody's a little bit disillusioned by their own success, right? it's a niche business. Most of us run niche businesses. We sell, streetwear to kids in the inner city or whatever. We sell plant-based protein powder to vegans who do CrossFit. And I think the illusion of the niche business, like they all grow incredibly fast early on because customers are cheap to acquire. But if you look, it's because you're acquiring all the cheap customers. If they're easy to acquire, you're acquiring them. And over time, the cost of acquisition is going to go down because you've acquired all the cheap customers. Like you've penetrated that niche. And then it gets more and more expensive to acquire a customer. That's more your marginal CAC as opposed to like your your overall CAC. So as any business grows, like that marginal CAC is going to be harder and harder to hit, to meet. So I think it's like instrumental to look at like what's the marginal cost of acquiring a new customer across various channels, right? Not just the historical one that I've had over the past to acquire all the customers I already have.
100%. Very cool, Drew. Thank you so much for coming on the podcast today. If you're listening, go check out PostPilot. Talk to Drew. He's a mensch. I think that's what Ezra described you as, a mensch, actually. And that's, I had to Google what a mensch was, and I think that's one of the reasons I've been so persistent. And now I think you may become a regular guest. It's been great having you
love it.
On the
it's
podcast,
fun.
Drew.
Yeah, shoot me an email anytime. I talk to people. I'm on Twitter. I'm on the Twitters. That's the story Ezra loved, is like Twitter started across the hall from us. Like we were running our drop shipper, selling furniture, doing like $1 million a year. We thought we were badass. And across the hall were 4 guys who started a podcasting company called Odeo, and it wasn't working. So they started sending these group messages around. And they put us on their distribution list, and they were like, "Hey, we're going to lunch. You want to go to lunch? We're playing Frisbee." And we're like, "No, man, we're busy running our profitable $1 million furniture business." And that was Twitter. Like they had just discovered a way to do group messaging, which again ultimately became Twitter. But Noah and Evan and Jack, and they were all like across the hall.
Right there.
Ezra loves the story. I'm not sure why he loves the story so much that I missed on the opportunity to join Twitter, or that they were in the same building, or that I'm old enough that I knew them. But whatever.
Probably something to do with all of them. I think that's great. I was just relating some of my funny stories of my way. I used to have very tight relationships with Yahoo back in the day, and I had some very funny stories about the kind of sketchy advertising I was able to get onto Yahoo, and how Carol Bartz famously remarked one time about an ad that she saw that I had placed, that she was quite disillusioned with all the dating ads that were in her Yahoo mail feed, specifically related to that was my best brush with fame there.
That's funny.
Nice, Drew. Well, good luck with everything. And let's stay in touch, man. This was fun.
This was great, Eric. Thanks.
Thanks so much for listening to today's episode. If you're not a subscriber to our newsletter, you can do that right now at directtoconsumer, all one word, .co. I'm Eric Dyck, and this has been the DTC Podcast. We'll see you next time.